After years of nursing, I've learned how to shield myself. Not completely, of course. Other people's pain still gets to me, but if I let every tragedy consume me, there'd be nothing left to keep going. It was just another regular night. A long, exhausting shift, one of those where time blurs between emergencies and protocols. I'd lost count of how many patients I'd seen without even catching my breath in between. When my name was called in the ER, I went without hesitation. Another critical case, another life in my hands. My steps were steady, my mind locked in. The protocol was second nature by now. Stabilize, stop the bleeding, assess the damage. All on autopilot. Then I saw the name on the chart, Daniel Carter. My body froze. It felt like the ground dropped out from under me. I read it again, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, it was him. The same Daniel who turned my teenage years into a nightmare. The boy who laughed while humiliating. Me, who spread rumors and shattered whatever little confidence I had left. The reason behind so many nights crying quietly, wishing I could disappear. And now, there he was, unconscious, severely injured, vulnerable, relying on me to stay alive. A wave of emotions crashed over me, suffocating anger, sharp fear, and, to my surprise, a faint taste of bitter satisfaction. I took a deep breath. I locked the storm inside me. It didn't matter who he was, I knew what had to be done. My hands were steady as I grabbed the equipment, but the moment my fingers touched his skin to place the heart monitor electrodes, a shiver ran through me. My body knew what my mind was trying to deny. This encounter was a dark abyss inside me, a past I couldn't erase. The team worked beside me, but I felt utterly alone. No one there knew what that name meant to me. No one noticed the subtle tremble in my fingers or the metallic taste of bitter memory. I closed my eyes for just a second. Just one, and then I kept going. The surgery had gone well. Daniel was stable but still unconscious. They told me he had been attacked during a robbery. The assailant beat him and left him for dead, lying in the middle of the street. Did he fight back? Or was there something more to it? No one really knew. It was strange to hear that. To me, Daniel had never been the victim. He had always been the predator. I looked at him through the ICU glass. The hospital gown, the tubes hooked up to his body, the fragility in his bruised face. None of it resembled the boy I used to know. But the memory of what he did to me was still vivid, like a scar that never truly healed. I should have just handed the case over to another nurse and moved on. That thought lingered in my mind throughout my entire shift. But every time I picked up another chart, a knot tightened in my chest, a hesitation. As if walking away now meant he still had some kind of power over me. So, that afternoon, I walked into room 312. Daniel was awake. The swelling around his eyes had started to go down, but deep cuts still marked his face. He was staring at the ceiling, lost in thought, until he noticed me. When our eyes met, something shifted. First, surprise. Then, a shadow of recognition. Chills ran down my spine. Did he remember me? My mind flashed back. The schoolyard, the cruel laughter, the whispers in the hallways. I remembered my heart pounding every time I had to face him, the constant fear of being his target again. For a moment, a bitter sense of satisfaction washed over me. I didn't feel sorry for him. Maybe I even felt a cold taste of justice. But then came the guilt. I swallowed hard and tried to shake the feeling, but it stuck to me. I wasn't like him. I didn't want to be. I straightened up and took a deep breath. I didn't know what to feel. I didn't know if I wanted to help him or turn my back and leave him alone in that hospital bed. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just some coincidence. Fate had put me here for a reason, and for the first time in years, I was going to face my past without running away. In the days that followed, I tried to focus on work. I failed miserably. Every time I walked into room 312 to change Daniel's bandage or adjust his medication, I felt a heavy, invisible weight pressing on my chest. It was like the past was lingering, in the air, thick, suffocating. He didn't say much. He just watched me in silence. His eyes followed me in a way that made me want to run, and yet somehow also stop in the middle of the room and ask, why? I didn't even know what I wanted. Part of me wanted to see him suffer, to make him feel at least a fraction of the pain he caused me. But there was another part, one I didn't like to acknowledge, that just wanted to understand. That night, after a long and draining shift, I walked past his room and saw him awake. He was still, staring at the ceiling like his mind was somewhere far away. But it wasn't arrogance. It wasn't superiority. It was emptiness. My breath caught. I could have just kept walking. He didn't deserve my attention. But before I realized what I was doing, I stopped at the door and said, "Can't sleep?" He slowly turned his head. His eyes looked hollow, like they carried more weight than they should. "No," he murmured after a long pause, and then, to my surprise, "Would you sit with me for a bit?" My first instinct was an immediate no, but my legs didn't listen. Something inside me, maybe that part still desperate for answers, made me pull a chair and sit by his bed. For a moment, we just sat there, the soft beeping of the heart monitor filling the silence. Then I took a deep breath and asked, "Why?" He didn't ask me to clarify. He didn't pretend not to understand. His shoulders slumped a little, and he looked toward the window. The silence dragged on so long, I thought he wouldn't answer. But then softly, almost like a confession to himself, he said, "Because I was afraid." My stomach turned. I had imagined so many answers, that it was just a joke, that he didn't know how much it hurt, that he simply didn't care. But fear? Afraid of what? He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering the courage to go on. My father. My spine stiffened. Daniel took a deep breath and let it out slowly, like he was trying to sort through his memories. "He used to hit me," he continued, voice barely a whisper. "He humiliated me. Nothing I did was ever good enough. If I got a 90 on a test, he'd ask why it wasn't a 100. If I left a glass out of place, he'd lock me in my room all night." My heart pounded in my chest. At school, I had to be someone else. I had to prove I was strong, that no one could hurt me. My throat went dry. I should feel anger. I wanted to feel anger. Nothing he said justified what he had done to me. Nothing could erase the memories of his cruel words, the mocking laughter, the nights I came home wishing I could disappear. But for the first time, I saw a broken boy behind those eyes. And that did something to me I wasn't ready for. I stood up before he could say anything else. "Good night, Daniel," and I walked out of the room, trying to ignore the knot tightening in my throat. After that night, something inside me just wouldn't settle. The truth about Daniel's past opened a door I wasn't sure I ever wanted to walk through. But now, after that confession, my anger didn't feel as sharp. Still, the weight of those memories clung to me. Every look, every invisible scar he left behind, they were all still there. He could justify his actions however he wanted, but I was the one who lived with the consequences. In the days that followed, I kept it professional. I did what needed to be done without showing anything beyond duty. But I noticed the way Daniel looked at me. It was different, like he was waiting for something. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe just a sign that I saw him as more than who he used to be. On the morning of his discharge, when I walked into the room to check his final tests, the silence felt heavy. The bed was made, his clean clothes were folded neatly on the chair. Everything pointed to him being ready to leave. The end of a cycle, the closing of a wound. There was a note left on the table beside the bed. It said, "I hope someday you can forgive me." I didn't know the answer. I didn't know if I'd ever forget, if I'd ever stop feeling that scar. When I thought about everything I went through, but in that moment, I realized forgiveness wasn't about him. It was about me. Daniel's discharge should have been the end of it. He would leave, I'd go back to my routine, and life would carry on as usual. But for some reason, the weight of that story didn't let me go. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself that nothing had changed. I saw other patients, filled out reports, had my morning coffee at the same place as always. The hospital kept moving at its usual pace, completely unaware of what was happening inside me. But every time I paused for a moment, I could still feel Daniel's note lingering in my mind. For years, forgiveness never felt like an option. Some wounds, I believed, just never healed. Some pain doesn't fade. It fuses into your skin and becomes part of who you are. But seeing him again, something shifted. Not because he deserved forgiveness, but because holding on to that pain felt like squeezing shards of glass. Only person I was hurting was myself. It was a quiet afternoon during a break in the hospital cafeteria when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Hey Sarah, I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to say I started therapy, and your kindness made me want to be a better person. Thank you." I stared at the screen for a few seconds, overwhelmed by a flood of emotions I didn't know how to name. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't begging for redemption or pushing for a reunion. He was just saying he was trying to change. My fingers trembled over the keyboard. I typed something, deleted it. What do you even say? I could ignore it. I could unload years of hurt into that message, but suddenly I realized none of it would change the past. And more than that, I didn't want to be defined by it anymore. I took a deep breath and typed the only thing that felt honest. "Good luck, Daniel." I hit send. And in that moment, something inside me gave way. An old tension, a quiet anger I didn't even realize I was carrying. It didn't vanish instantly, but it lost its grip, like a flame slowly dying out. The past always leaves its mark. Some are visible, etched on our skin like scars that time can't erase. Others are invisible, hidden behind smiles that cover old wounds or cautious gestures trying to avoid new ones. I carried mine for so long I began to see them as part of me. As if every painful memory was proof of my strength, a shield against vulnerability. But facing Daniel again, I saw it clearly. Holding on to that weight didn't protect me. It trapped me. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean excusing. Forgiveness means letting go. And in that moment, letting go of that conversation, I understood. My scars will always be part of my story, but for the first time, they don't define me anymore.